2 Corinthians 3:16-17. But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Now the Lord is a spirit, and where the spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So the question is, what's the veil, what's the freedom, and what's the link between them? Well, the freedom is unimpeded, unrestricted access to the presence of God, and the veil is the barrier of our sin, which stops us from being able to reach the unimpeded, unrestricted access to the presence of God. So Moses would meet in God's presence in the tabernacle, and the tabernacle was God's dwelling place on earth. But the tabernacle can really be separated into two parts. There's the part where God actually dwelt, which was the Ark of the Covenant, and then that part was cordoned off from the rest of it by the veil, which was the curtain, therefore separating the most holy place, which was where God dwelt, Ark of the Covenant, from the rest of the tabernacle. Moses had unveiled face when he went into the presence of God in the tabernacle, because God had given him the freedom we're talking about, that unrestricted access. However, when Moses had been in the tabernacle, his face would be radiant from the effect of being in God's presence. But the other Israelites who he was leading, didn't have that freedom that he had. They didn't even have the freedom to see the effect of being in God's presence, let alone have the freedom to actually be in God's presence. And that's why Moses had to wear the veil, to preserve them from the effects of breaching the barrier which existed to them of not being able to have the access to God's presence. Just as Moses had unveiled face and unimpeded access to meet in God's presence in the Old Testament, we have it in a fuller sense in the New Testament, because Moses went to a tabernacle. The difference is we actually are the tabernacle, because in 1 Corinthians 6:18-20, Paul talks about the fact that we are the temples now. The temple was the replacement of the tabernacle in the Old Testament. And so just as God's dwelling place on earth was a tabernacle and then a temple in the Old Testament, his dwelling place on earth is the human beings in whom the Holy Spirit dwells in the New Covenant, because it's God the Holy Spirit, the Lord the Holy Spirit, dwelling in tabernacles, which is human beings. And the only way that's been made possible is the fact that Jesus died on the cross and atoned for our sin, and by atoning for our sin and removing it, he removes the barrier of our sin to having the unimpeded, unrestricted access to the presence of God. And therefore that's why the Holy Spirit represents the freedom that Paul is talking about, because through the Holy Spirit we have the freedom of complete proximity and access to the presence of God by the presence of God himself in us, which is God the Holy Spirit. So